From a bench outside the castle in Owings Mills, Maryland, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Wednesday night, 6:30 on the dot, just like we planned it. Had this actually planned for 6 o'clock, and then life circumstances take over. Jonas, it is humid. Last time we were podcasting out here, it was quite hot. It's not as hot, but the rain has made it very, very humid, and you might see some glistening foreheads if you're watching this live on YouTube or on X, most particularly myself and Jonas, who you can follow at Paul Mancano and at Jonas_Shaffer. Jonas, we are here to discuss the Ravens' final day of mandatory minicamp. We are here to discuss the big acquisition of cornerback Jaire Alexander. But first, like, rate, review, subscribe. Write us a 5-star review, and I will read it out here on the show. It's time to give out our Who's Got It Better Than award, Jonas. And our Who's Got It Better Than does not go to Jaire Alexander. It goes to Lamar Jackson, because Lamar Jackson got his guy. He got his former Louisville teammate after making that request, an appeal, if you will. Our word of the day is appeal, sticking it all in one, to Eric DeCosta to sign cornerback Jaire Alexander. And he got him. Here's what Lamar Jackson said yesterday when asked about Jaire Alexander being out there on the market.
There's a certain Louisville cornerback, accomplished cornerback available.
Go get him, Eric. I love all our corners, don't get me wrong, but go get him, Eric.
Have you had a chance to talk to Jaire about coming here?
Yeah, I hit him up, but you know, you don't know. You never know with Jaire. That's my boy, man.
So Jonas, Eric got him. He got his guy. Jaire Alexander is a Baltimore Raven on a 1-year deal worth $4 million, worth up to $6 million, according to NFL Network. How do you feel?
I feel like the honorable mention or the runner-up for Who's Got It Better Than could be Chuck Pagano, because what a room. I don't think he realized what he was getting into when he decided to come back to Baltimore. He's got potential first-round starters at every pick. Kyle Hamilton's probably the best safety in the game. Marlon Humphrey, one of the best slot cornerbacks in the game. Nate Wiggins could be one of the best outside cornerbacks in the game. And we know Jaire Alexander, there aren't a lot of two-time All-Pro cornerbacks just out there on the street waiting to be picked up. Malachi Starks, best safety in this draft class. The Ravens got him. So expectations are high. This should be an interesting signing. Classic kind of late off-season, pre-training camp, mid-training camp selection. If this could be anywhere as impactful as the Jadeveon Clowney signing was for the Ravens, he wasn't a Pro Bowl, but he had that same kind of influence, same kind of impact on games, and this will have been worth it. Obviously, they're not really having to sell the farm to go get this guy. They clearly have the cap space. They probably have some more cap space to get another guy if they need to, but it just speaks to the power of Lamar that snaps his fingers and there's his old teammate back in Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar, when he was in his contract negotiations for his first contract extension, made the request for OBJ. Eric DeCosta got OBJ. He made the request for
probably overpaid,
perhaps, for $15 million at the time, and they are still paying that. Asked for DeAndre Hopkins. He got that eventually.
A little bit late, yeah.
A little bit late, a year late. This one was immediate. Asked for Jaire Alexander less than 24 hours before the Ravens go out and sign Jaire Alexander. So, look, the Ravens were more incentivized to actually go out and get OBJ at the time because they were trying to appease Lamar Jackson. They signed him before Lamar re-signed to his contract extension. And this one was clearly in the works. Jaire Alexander was clearly already in discussions with the Ravens before Lamar Jackson made his public plea. However, do you think if Lamar Jackson were to go to Eric DeCosta and demand that the Baltimore Banner give Jonas Shaffer a raise, that Eric DeCosta would call up our publisher, our editor-in-chief, and ask that happen? Because it seems like anything that Lamar asks for, he gets.
Yeah, I don't think the Ravens are in any mood of helping out the Banner after this spring.
Why not?
But this has been, they've done a lot of catering to Lamar for good things and more questionable things. Nothing nefarious there, but just how they kind of orient their offseason, how they orient their practice schedule. So it's certainly not an unreasonable request for Lamar Jackson to ask Eric DeCosta to go get one of the best cornerbacks in the game, especially considering one of the few questions on this roster was who's going to be the third starting corner next to Nate Wiggins, next to Marlon Humphrey. If you want to subscribe to the theory that this is a weak link type of ecosystem in the NFL where you're only as good as the worst starter on your defense, then obviously, you might not have felt great about Awuzie. You might not have felt great about Jalen Armour-Davis. You might not have felt great about TJ Tampa, although all those guys, I think, have made plays over the past couple of days in mandatory minicamp, going back to OTAs. Obviously, the losers from this deal are the guys at the middle to lower end of the depth chart that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Sucks for them if this is indeed a deal that has legs where Jaire Alexander is becoming a potential 16, 17 game starter, then you're kind of blocking the path to the playing field for these guys. But the Ravens are in a position to win. They're in a position to win now, or they're in a position to win big. And this defense is stacked. I mean, we spent all offseason talking about how well positioned this offense is to do what it has to. But the defense is just fine as shape.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about how this kind of impacts the guys that are lower down on the list and lower down on the roster and are going to be fighting for their roster lives come training camp. But who Jaire Alexander is as a player, literally our last podcast, we discussed in depth what Jaire Alexander could bring to the table, what he has left in the tank. Still only 28 years old. There are no qualms about him as a cornerback when he is on the field. There are no qualms about his quality of play. It is getting him on the field, in his current state. All-Pro in 2020 and 2022. PFF had him as the number 19 cornerback in 2024. Next gen stats says Jaire Alexander forced tight window throws on 32% of his targets since 2018. That's the fourth highest rate in the NFL. He is still a lockdown cornerback. He's an outside cornerback, so he's not going to play in the slot. Marlon Humphrey is going to be taking most of those responsibilities, we assume. And he is still an elite cornerback when he is on the field. The problem is the last several years have been marred by injury. Last year plays only 7 games, doesn't play after week 11. 2023, only 7 games. Played 16 games in 2022, but the year before that, 2021, only 4 games played. Last year, it was a knee injury that he suffered in October. MRI showed at the time that there was no real significant concern, but it kept him out the rest of the season. It was a shoulder injury and an ankle injury in 2023. He has been significantly impacted by injuries. That's the reason that the Green Bay Packers cut him when he was due about $16.5 million this year. They tried their hardest to trade him. Were not able to do so. If Jaire Alexander is healthy, he is a shutdown quarterback. It's just a big if.
Yeah, he's also, I think, dealt with a quad and groin injury, so it's always something with him. But you don't want to. I don't want to cast aspersions on the Packers medical staff because obviously they're a top class organization, just like the Ravens. But sometimes you bring in a guy like a Jadeveon Clowney who's been through the ringer medically, and you have a plan for him, and that plan works out, and you're able to get probably one of the best years of his career out of him at a point when no one really thought he could be the kind of difference maker that he was. And then, you bring in a guy like Rock Ya-Sin, who also I think had been through some stuff medically, and you think, we've also got a plan for him, and that plan doesn't really go to plan, but it doesn't really end up mattering because you end up getting, generational play calling from Mike McDonald, generational development from the rest of that 2019 team. I think 2023 team, I think Rock's team was signed for, ended up being a very, very, very good team. So, John Harbaugh said they have a plan for Jaire. They said they have a plan for Awuzie. Obviously, whether it actually bears out is a whole nother matter. But I think an interesting way to think about this is like, if you are only going to get 7 games out of Jaire Alexander before, things go bust, you'd probably rather have him, of course you'd want to have him for the playoffs, but wouldn't you rather to have him over the first third of the season when the competition is stiffest? You're going up against just a gauntlet of quarterbacks. And, you hope that when he is healthy, he is on the field for that potentially season defining stretch, because the ramifications of that first 6 weeks from September and October, mid-October, could have huge consequences on, where the Ravens are in the playoff race, potential tiebreakers in the playoff race, everything. So if you want to be a pessimist and say the Ravens are only going to get a third of the season with Jaire Alexander, then I probably, put my hands together and praying that I'm having him for that first third of the season, because what a test that will be for everyone on that defense.
Yeah, problem is you can't pick and choose when a guy is going to get hurt or if he gets hurt.
Yeah.
Ideally, you'd have him for the entire year. The way that they've structured this contract, according to NFL Network, is gets $4 million guaranteed, and then it's $500,000 marks for certain snap count totals. So 35% of teams' defensive snaps, that's 500,000, 40%, 45%, up to 50%. Now, those don't seem like very high parameters. They don't seem like very high benchmarks, but considering it's 7 games played in each of the last 2 seasons for Jaire Alexander, I think that's fair to ask. And you don't need him to be healthy the entire way. I think, yes, it would be great to have him at the beginning of the season. It'd be more impactful to have him for the playoffs, assuming there's a potential playoff run. But we've talked about this secondary was perhaps the only area that we really thought that the Ravens could add. Maybe, adding that run stuffing defensive tackle. Maybe you could add another edge rusher, but they feel pretty good about their group there. Other than that, this is a very, very stacked defense. It's a stacked secondary. So it's just an added piece. It's not like you traded away anything to get him. It's not like there's any comp pick attached to him. Adding Jaire Alexander could really only make you better, with the caveat that at times, you used the word, Jonas, on our last podcast, knucklehead. At times he has been a knucklehead. In 2023 was when the Packers suspended him for 1 game because of the coin toss fiasco, when he kind of crashed the coin toss with the captains of the Packers, went out there and said all the coin toss correctly. I think we should give him points for that, but then said the wrong thing. Instead of saying we want to defer, he said we want to play defense. And if the referee had not asked for clarification, the Packers could have had to kick twice, once at the beginning of the game and once at halftime. It was a boneheaded decision. That's why the Packers decided to suspend him for that 1 game. To his credit, he also said he did not blast the Packers for that. He did not criticize them for that. He said their relationship only grew stronger with the coaching staff because of that. I don't imagine him being a locker room issue, but there is a little bit of knuckleheadery in his past as well.
Yeah, and none other than Marlon Humphrey fessed up to, I believe it was the Packers cornerbacks coach or DBs coach or secondary coach had coached Marlon at Alabama, I believe. Marlon told us today, and I think Jaire told him, or someone told Marlon, that they are 2 peas in the same pod. And Marlon was surprised by that, because not a lot of people are compared personality-wise to Marlon Humphrey. Marlon, obviously, almost nobody. There's only one Marlon. Obviously, Marlon, I think, as far as I can recall, has never run afoul of team rules, never run afoul of NFL rules. He's not doing anything untoward at coin tosses or anything else. Obviously, if you kind of look through the records of Jaire Alexander interviews, I think he is the kind of guy like Lamar, who marches to the beat of his own drum. Obviously, I think he's going to have to learn this defense for it to be the kind of juggernaut that we expect it to be. To hear the Ravens have all this optimism for Jaire Alexander being the kind of shutdown guy that he could be. You can hold that in the same hand, or in the same way that you also hold the points from Marlon, where he's talking about how the reason that the defense didn't work over the first half of last season was because from one bad play to another, someone was messing up. Someone wasn't doing their job. And if you have a guy who has all the talent in the world, but isn't putting in the time to learn the playbook, or is just off freelancing or trying to play for that next contract, which Jaire Alexander at this point in his career definitely is, then, you're kind of back to square one. So it's going to be interesting. I guess it's going to be fascinating to me. This was a defense when it was in its kind of cornerback heyday with Marlon and I guess Brandon Carr and Marcus Peters. They were unafraid to play man coverage. And we've kind of moved away from that in the NFL as like the defensive meta, because you have, all these zone match coverage, matching coverage matches, pattern matches, everything that is very complex and easy to kind of be flexible with your run fits and everything. But if you are comfortable, Nate Wiggins, if you're comfortable with Marlon Humphrey, Jaire Alexander, where else is on the field, then it really doesn't matter like how many guys you're dropping into coverage as long as you have enough dudes to cover however many eligible receivers are there. Just don't do cover 0 as much as you want. Do cover 1 as much as you want because the time that it takes for you to get home, if you again believe in these guys, should be enough time for them to hold up in coverage for however long it takes. I mean, obviously, it's going to be a whole heck of a challenge doing it against the Bengals or the Eagles if they play in the playoffs. You could probably feel a little more comfortable doing it against the Steelers at this point, but having this much talent in the back end gives you so much flexibility with what you want to do, pass rush wise, high leverage spots, everything. It just the trickle down effect is just amazing.
Yeah, and what differs about this move, I think, to me, as compared to, I think look back to the Eddie Jackson signing, perhaps from last year, is this move was made fairly early. I think this had the potential to go on a long time. Oftentimes, when you see guys who are former Pro Bowlers, former All Pros, who get released and are looking for a second contract. I mean, look at Jadeveon Clowney, who likes to drag things out. He's still a free agent right now after he got released by the Panthers. I think this had the potential to go into training camp for Jaire Alexander to wait as long as he possibly could to get a deal done. He was in the building today. I mean, he signed and he didn't practice, but he signed his deal, got a chance to meet everybody, now has a chance to work over everything that Zach Moore can send him, can, meet and talk with Chuck Pagano. Like, I think that this having a little bit more foundation, a little bit more time to grow the roots here is going to help. And it's just going to take buy-in. I mean, it's going to take buy-in from Jaire Alexander in the same way that I think the buy-in wasn't quite there from Eddie Jackson. I think Eddie Jackson was playing a different role. He was signed to sort of be a third safety, whether he knew that or not. We don't know. But Eric DeCosta, we said on our last show, has, looked back at the things that went wrong last year. And one of those things is maybe he hasn't communicated clearly enough with the veterans that he's bringing in what their role will be. In this instance, I think Jaire Alexander is signing this deal believing that he is going to be an outside cornerback starting on the opposite side of Nate Wiggins with Marlon Humphrey in between them.
I guess what you potentially risk there is, again, the most common formation in the NFL for offenses nowadays is 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers out there.
Right.
But we've seen teams like the Ravens lean into these heavier formations where you have two tight ends on the field or 2 backs on the field. And will Jaire Alexander, when the Ravens get into those games against those heavier personnel teams, be fine with not being a guy who's starting out there when it's Marlon on one side, Nate Wiggins on the other, and you have 2 safeties, and just the rest are your front 7. I guess that is the question that I have. Like, especially if you're playing with his pocketbook and you're constantly eyeing, how am I going to make this next $500,000? And you're kind of getting to the end of the schedule here, and you're expecting to get on the field, and maybe your play isn't there. Does that become a little bit explosive? Obviously, we saw last year with Deontay Johnson just how much of a pain in the butt he was, even in the games when they were winning. Certainly, we don't expect the Ravens to be an underdog in too many games this season. I mean, for all we know, with this addition, they might even be now favored against the Bills, I think, in that Week 1 game. Probably not, but I imagine the line has closed somewhat. But, I haven't done a whole lot into Jaire Alexander's background. Obviously, he's been a beloved guy wherever he's gone. Certainly, having the talent that he has made things a lot easier for him. But I think we're going to get the chance to learn a lot more about him and his thought process when he does talk to us. And we don't actually know when that is because the Ravens aren't making him available with minicamp having ended. And it sounds like we might not get the chance to talk to him until training camp.
Yeah, at some point when we do hear from him, we hope to find that out. And when John Harbaugh was asked about the kind of veterans that they're bringing in, he did specifically talk about you have to be the right guy who's ready to buy in. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is brought in, and it's a guy that you have to trust that they have done their research, that they've done their homework, and that this guy knows the kind of role that he's coming in for and believes it. I mean, those snap count percentages are really interesting because if there is an injury that keeps Jaire Alexander out for significant amounts of games, then you're just doing a percentage thing where you're just number of games divided by 17 to determine it. But if say a few games here and there early on in the season, and then it gets down to the wire, and he's sitting at between 40 and 45% of the snaps, that is a potential issue. And we saw last year somebody like Ronnie Stanley make himself a lot of money because he was consistently available on an incentive-laden contract. These are benchmarks that these guys want to hit. Jadeveon Clowney, I believe, got the sack that he needed to in the final game of the regular season 2 years ago and did the money celebration when he got it. The players obviously know what these benchmarks are, and they're paying attention to them. So that is something to watch for sure. In terms of player right now, Jonas, you made the comparison last week to late stage Marcus Peters because of Marcus Peters' tendency to gamble, maybe not as sticky. Do you still see that in Jaire Alexander? Is that a cause for concern, or is that an okay take?
I mean, at $4 million, it's definitely a fine risk to take. I haven't done a lot of digging into last year's film to really know what he is all about. We were talking before we hopped on about his performance against A.J. Brown when the Packers did play the Eagles earlier in the season. And that was a game that maybe opened some eyes that he wasn't quite the shutdown corner of yore. I mean, like, he got paid to be the highest paid cornerback in the NFL for a reason, because he was that good.
Years, like $80 million.
I think 4 years, $84 million. And in the game against the Eagles, again, not an explosive passing offense really until the playoffs. I think he gave up 4 catches for over 100 yards on 5 targets. A.J. Brown is obviously top 1% of the top 1% of wide receiver athletes. But welcome to the AFC North. You've got to tackle DK Metcalf. You've got to tackle Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. Obviously, we don't know what Cleveland's wide receiver room is going to look like in terms of productivity, but Jerry Jeudy's coming off an incredible year there. He's not quite the athlete that those guys are, but he brings a lot to the table. So he can still do a lot. Jaire Alexander, obviously the effects on that Packers defense last year were pretty profound. They allowed a 9.7% lower completion percentage with him on the field compared to when he was not, 61% to 70%. Opposing quarterbacks also threw for just 7 touchdowns and 8 interceptions when he was on the field. Next gen stats, when he was off the field, 15 touchdowns allowed, 8 interceptions forced, much higher passer rating, obviously. So it's going to be fun to see just like matchups that we'll get in training camp. I mean, Wiggins against whoever, it's going to be Jaire Alexander against whoever, or Humphrey against whoever. Obviously, it's going to be like the Ravens' top 3 against whoever else's top 3 when those guys are matched up in all the formations and all the looks that we'll get in training camp. Will just be really, really fun to watch. I mean, Lamar's not going to have a lot of he's definitely not going to have as many open guys as he did during the regular season last year because of just how good these guys are.
Yeah. In terms of how this affects the guys who are lower down on the pecking order, who are going to be on the roster bubble, it's interesting that the Ravens lost Ardarius Washington potentially for the year, at least until November. That really thinned out their safety room, and they went and got a cornerback because that safety room without Ardarius Washington still looks a little bit thin. They're expecting Malachi Starks to be one of the starting safeties next to Kyle Hamilton. Other than that, they have Bo Braid in the mix. They have Sanusi Kane in the mix. There aren't a whole lot of guys at that spot right now. There's still months to go before training camp. But then you look at the quarterback, and it is almost we've heard the phrase a million times today. You can't have too many good corners. The Ravens, that would be a great problem to have. The Ravens have an awful lot of corners when you look at it right now. I mean, between the starters that we mentioned, and Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins, and now Jaire Alexander, then you're talking about young guys who the Ravens have invested mid to late round picks in. TJ Tampa, who was a 4th rounder last year, Bilal Kone, Jalen Armour Davis, of course, Robert Longerbeam. That is a talented group that we just have not seen a whole lot from. And we've heard it before that the edict comes from on high in this organization to play the young guys. That's part of the reason that the Ravens turned over 3 offensive line spots last year was they wanted to give Daniel Falele an opportunity. They wanted to see what they had in Andrew Voorhees. And now they are in a position where there are some veterans that are blocking these young guys. And I do wonder that if all of these guys go through training camp healthy, how many guys can they realistically take here? They took 5 cornerbacks on their initial 53-man roster. How many are they going to take?
Let's start with safety. I think that's probably the most interesting part of this deal. Like the Ravens still might be in the market for safety. There's still plenty of decent to good safeties out there. But if you were talking about this idea that like the top 5 cornerbacks or the top 5 DBs are going to be Marlon, Wiggins, Alexander, Hamilton, Starks, you don't have the flexibility of moving Kyle Hamilton into the slot that you did when you had 3 safeties, because you need someone who can be. And we've seen Marlon take snaps occasionally at safety, but I think you don't want to just throw a guy to safety just for shits and giggles because you want Kyle Hamilton in the slot, because the redundancy of their skill sets, I think, kind of speaks for itself. Like Kyle Hamilton can do a lot of stuff that Marlon Humphrey can do. Marlon Humphrey can do a lot of stuff that Kyle Hamilton can do, at least in the slot. So I think the Ravens are fine making that trade-off where you are more secure at all 5 spots, even if you have a little less flexibility before a snap, because you can't move Kyle Hamilton around as much as this chess piece. But when it comes to the cornerbacks, it's we're kind of running out of room in the end right now. I just mocked up a 53-man roster last night before the Jaire Alexander signing. This is kind of assuming it's 25 offense, 25 defense, 3 special teams. I had 11 DBs in total, 7 cornerbacks: Marlon, Wiggins, Awuzie, Armour Davis, Tampa, Kone, Longerbeam, and the 4 safeties, obviously Hamilton, Starks, Sanusi Kane, Bo Braid. I think the 4 safeties are pretty safe there, because I don't think you can go into the season with just 4 healthy safeties. You put Ardarius Washington on the injured reserve designated return thing. He doesn't take up a roster spot. You hope that he is available to come later in the season. But one of those cornerbacks, I think, is probably now on the chopping block. And maybe it's a Longerbeam. Maybe it's Awuzie if he just doesn't do what he has to. I'm rooting for Armour Davis, but obviously we know about his injury history. I think Armour Davis and Wiggins, Armour Davis and Tampa both showed us some pretty good stuff in minicamp and toward the end of OTA. So I think they are trending upward. But if you're Eric DeCosta, if you're Steve Bisciotti, you don't feel great about waiving a guy like Kone or waiving a guy like Longerbeam and hoping to get him back on your practice squad by virtue of just no one else having room on their own 53-man roster when these rosters are finalized. So someone or someones are going to kind of feel going to get a pink slip because of this.
What do you think the possibility is that we see Jalen Armour Davis convert to safety long term? We saw a little bit of that last week.
It's definitely possible. We didn't see as much of it in minicamp this week. So we'll see. I mean, maybe that's something that the Ravens tell him to kind of commit more mental energy to over this offseason hiatus, and he comes back and he does have that flexibility. Obviously, he has the athleticism to play special teams, which is a mark in his favor, and it's going to be something that's, of course, very heavily valued as the Ravens get down to business and trying to figure out how everyone fits. But someone that you really, really like or have really, really high hopes for in this cornerback room probably isn't making the team. And if they are, or if everyone is making the team, it's probably because one of these guys got hurt and had a serious enough injury to start the year on IR. So it's gonna be tough. I mean, you can only put 2 of those guys on the IR designated to return. So if you want to keep a couple guys who are hurt, you're gonna have to have them on the 53-man roster and just hope that no one or someone you like, is healthy enough to come back within a relatively short time.
And I also think training camp is the time where we often see these roster bubble guys in 1-for-1 deals across the NFL. You could see a move like a cornerback traded for a safety. And Jalen Armour Davis, who's coming up on the last year of his deal, perhaps this is an instance where the Ravens say, we don't want to roster him and just have him play one more year. We kind of know what we have in him. The safety experiment didn't work out. Let's go get somebody else. Either let's go get a safety or let's get somebody at a different position and sign a safety off the street, because this is an area clearly now of glut on the roster is cornerback, and safety right now seems a little bit thin, but there is the possibility that the Ravens go out and sign somebody else. Were you concerned at all, Jonas? We mentioned it last week. The fact that the Packers held on to Jaire Alexander for as long as they did and tried to trade him, but were not able to. Nobody was willing to take on the $16 million deal that he was owed. Does that concern you? Because that kind of tells you what the league thinks about him?
I think it just says that Jaire Alexander and his people, I guess, wanted their fair share until the Ravens became available. They took less than their fair share. Clearly there was not as much interest around the league as we thought there was in him. Would have been curious to see what he would have fetched on an open market if the Ravens hadn't been a suitor and Lamar wasn't advertising him to come to Baltimore. Um, you know, Again, I think a lot of teams have spent their have spent their offseason budget and probably didn't have enough room in the old coffers for a cornerback like Jaire Alexander. Obviously, there's plenty of teams with a bunch of cap space, but probably not too interested in shaking things up, especially concerned about his fit in the locker room. Certainly, if he only wanted to play for a contender, and it sounds like definitely a high consideration, ruled out some teams. Maybe he didn't think that going to an LA Rams or an LA Chargers was something that he was too keen on doing because they aren't as much of a playoff block as the Ravens are now. But again, a lot of questions for him that we cannot answer, and so hopefully we talk to him ahead of training camp. But if not, I guess we'll hold on until then.
Yeah, we've kind of discussed now the risks that come with the signing. Every signing comes with risk. We've laid out the case of why he became available, how the Ravens were able to get him so cheap. If you just look at the upside of this signing, it's hard not to look at this if everything works out as a major, major addition. And we could be looking 6 months down the road and saying the Ravens were able to scoop up a two-time Pro Bowl cornerback off the street for $4 to $6 million, get him in their building, and shore up that cornerback spot, a spot that was, an issue for the first half of last year, a spot that potentially has the potential to be one of the best units in the league now for the Ravens. And for a team that I think some already have the Ravens as Super Bowl favorites, and that's the title of this podcast, if this move kind of puts them over the top. And it's hard to say on paper that this move does not make them better and that this move does not increase their Super Bowl odds. It has to work out on the field. I just feel so much better about this move than I did about, for example, the Eddie Jackson signing last year. Jaire Alexander is not to keep harping on Eddie Jackson. He's going to be the
Who's got it worse than?
Who's got it worse than Eddie Jackson on this podcast. But this is an impact signing. This is a seriously impactful signing. And it has the potential, I think, to be a game changer for the Ravens. And I'm looking at, it's weeks away, months away before we make our season predictions. But Jonas, I'm looking at this roster on paper, and it's hard to say that any team in the NFL has a better roster than the Ravens right now.
Yeah, they are right now on FanDuel these co-Super Bowl favorites. I'm surprised that the team that they are co-Super Bowl favorites with is not the Eagles. The Eagles are now tied for third, it looks like, or third right now. It's the Ravens and the Bills who are Super Bowl favorites, which is a little bit surprising to me. I thought it would be the Ravens and Eagles 1-2 in whatever order
Eagles
you would have
a
it.
lot of talent on team.
Yeah.
And they're lost their offensive coordinator.
I think I have I believe, a much harder schedule this year than they did last year. But yeah, when you just consider, the Ravens don't have the Eagles' young ascending base to a degree. The Eagles have a lot of guys who are hugely impactful players on their first contracts. You've got, Jalen Carter. You've got Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, Nolan Smith,
Jordan Davis.
There's really a lot of guys who are still in the peak of their career on good contracts. Obviously, I think their higher end talent is probably higher end than the Ravens. You have a bunch of guys who could conceivably make the case for the best player at their position for the Ravens, other than Lamar and Derrick Henry and Kyle Hamilton. Certainly, I don't know how many other guys you could make that case for. I think the Eagles have the slight edge there. But when you're just talking about like how you go about attacking this defense or how you go about attacking this offense, just there aren't a lot of easy solutions there. And there's just Pro Bowlers at every single position. I mean, like I'm just trying to like there's probably not a legitimate candidate for like a Pro Bowl guard on this team. You could probably say that Zay was a little bit lucky last year with how the AFC wide receiver pecking order shook out, that he was able to make that team. I think he's probably be a longer shot this year because of just the depth of talent there. But you've got Pro Bowlers at like pretty much every other spot. Like if Adafe Owe makes
Yeah, I
the
was
leap
gonna say,
that we think
edge
he's going to
rusher.
make,
Yeah.
that's and that's fine. You know, that's if you just have again the Chiefs made the Super Bowl last year with weaknesses at so many different spots and injuries at a bunch of different spots during the season. So, you know, I asked John Harbaugh about those kind of Super Bowl expectations, and he just kind of invoked his familiar, you know, pressure is a privilege concept that has been bandied about a bunch of times. But these guys are heading into this 4 or 5 week break with all of the NFL asking who's going to beat the Ravens, not just in the AFC North, but in the AFC, because what they've done is fortified themselves in so many key spots with the Starks draft pick, with the Mike Green selection, and now with the Jaire Alexander selection. I mean, there were no concerns about the offense because of just how much consistency there was. But now with the defense, you know, Zach Orr's going to be a very, very wake up tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I did see a comment as we were live on YouTube and on X asking about whether this places more pressure on John Harbaugh. I don't think John Harbaugh is under a whole lot of pressure when you look at a lot of the coaches around the NFL. I mean, I think he has
Got an
still
extension.
just got a contract extension this offseason. I think he has perhaps one of the most secure job spots in the NFL. That's in this organization that wants to keep stability. They want to keep a stable head coach in place when they are still have Lamar Jackson under contract. They're still happy with the job that he's done. Whether or not they reach the Super Bowl, I don't think will have a whole lot of impact on his job status. I think that if the season is a disaster, then we're maybe having a different conversation. But it's hard to see the floor of this team being anything lower than, unless everybody gets hit by the plague, anything lower than like 8 or 9 wins is the floor of this team, and the ceiling should be Super Bowl champion. I mean, that's really the level of talent that they have brought in here, and it's just a matter of putting it all together. It's a matter of going out there and showing it.
Yeah, I mean, thinking bigger picture about this team, I think someone pointed out on Twitter the biggest concern for this team is probably the kicker. You know,
True, and
special teams in general. Again, they were not even top 20 in DVOA last year. We don't know who's going to be their punt returner. We don't know who's going to be their kickoff returner. We don't know, what success this year looks like for Jordan Stout, nor do we know how close he is to kind of realize the potential and the dreams the Ravens had for him when they drafted him, 3 or 4 years ago. So, special teams, we've seen it be the death of some really, really good teams over the years. We've seen the 49ers lose playoff games because of it. We've seen the Packers lose playoff games because of it. Certainly, I think we're expecting the Ravens to blow out a bunch of teams this year, even though their schedule, again, is pretty dang tough. But if you're in these close games and you don't have a kicker who can make a 40-yarder reliably, or you don't have a punter who you trust to make a pooch punt and kind of force these 95-yard drives, or you don't have a kick returner or a punt returner that you can trust to field the ball cleanly or return it smartly or do all the stuff, then you're going to make yourself you're going to erase some of these margins for error that you have. And we did not get a chance, strangely, to talk to Chris Horton this offseason yet. Obviously it's going to be the plan every few days in training camp, but there are a lot of questions about why last year went as painfully bad as it did for the Ravens, because they have always relied on a mix of young guys and veterans to do the job for them in special teams, and certainly Justin Tucker had a lot to do with their problems last year. But bringing in Jaire Alexander is not going to make Tyler Luke's job any easier. It's still going to be him out there on an island trying to make kicks in the swirling winds of Pittsburgh, or I'm just trying to think of in the cold of Buffalo or wherever he has to go. So certainly you don't have to, you hope if you're a Ravens fan that you don't have to rely on Tyler Luke's right leg because of how stacked this team is. But at some point you're going to need every single guy on the special teams unit. And we just don't know how much closer they are to being the class of the NFL because of just how bad last year went for them.
I mean, kicker is a very high leverage position. The Ravens also the worst year ever from Justin Tucker, and they still won 12 games.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was fixed after the bye, didn't miss a kick after that, and didn't hurt them in the playoff loss to Buffalo. But a rookie in that kind of situation, whether it is their sixth rounder or an undrafted guy, is still going to be a question mark. That's a different situation, high pressure situation, and we won't know anything about his ability to handle whoever that guy is, his ability to handle that situation until he's thrust in that kind of situation, no matter how much training camp he makes.
Yeah, we should also say that just like with the expectations for this team being what it is, just the annual, not the annual, the regular temper your expectations. Reminder that the Ravens last year had unbelievably good injury luck.
They did.
One of the healthiest teams in the NFL. Pretty much any metric you look at, you think of just how little fluctuation there was along the offensive line. You think of how much stability they had at wide receiver until the playoffs with the Zay Flowers injury. The changes on defense were guys getting benched, guys rising to certain spots. But, like we saw with our Darius, unfortunately, the realities of the NFL dictate that more injuries are probably coming. And you hope that they are not severe. You hope that they're not career affecting. But, one or two more guys will probably have severe injuries that at least knock them out for, if not a couple, months, then at least a couple of weeks during the season. And you just hope that the coaching and the depth on this team is what it's been built to be, so that you don't have these clear and obvious patches on your defense or your offense that other teams can build their entire game plans around, because that was what undid the Ravens last year. Just go after the safeties, and chances are you're going to go for 300 yards.
Yeah, and that's also why I sometimes have a hard time using the excuse of Zay Flowers being out when looking at that loss, because about everybody else on the roster was healthy. Yeah. I know that the Ravens absolutely could have used Zay Flowers in that playoff game. I think there's a chance they win that playoff game if Zay Flowers is healthy. However, they were healthy enough around that. So any team is going to have some kind of attrition via injuries. And so to me, that's it. That excuse rings a little bit hollow, just because one player, as great as that player may be, he's not. It's not one player away from getting a win in that situation. They should have been able to overcome that.
Yeah. Can you think of a team when you think of just, this is a kind of a weird place for my mind to go, but those like Twitter Muse accounts where it's like the cartoon, and it's like I think it's Muse. It's like, Lamar Muse or Jaire Muse. It's kind of like a fan account for a bunch of players.
Yes.
Can you think of a team either in 2025 or more recently that has more like dudes than the Ravens have right now? I mean, between Lamar, Derrick Henry, I guess you could say Zay is there. I mean, like maybe Mark probably isn't there because he was never really part of the culture, so to speak. But DeAndre Hopkins has been a big name. Roquan, Kyle Hamilton, Humphrey, Jaire Alexander, Nate Wiggins obviously has his own, cult growing. It's just like, this is going to be a fascinating team to cover. I hope that players make themselves more available this year than they were last year, because we are going to have no shortage of personalities to cover, especially if things go really, really good or really, really badly. But it's just, a team that you don't really see a lot of in terms of how many big names are on both sides of the ball. And like, again, it could have been you could have had even one more big name if not for the Justin Tucker situation.
Yeah, let's just hope we have a better place to cover it from than this bench right outside the entrance to the castle.
Yeah.
We have more thoughts from minicamp, but we've already gone on for 45 minutes. You can read everything that Jonas Shaffer has written, and Gianna Hahn and Kyle Kuhn, BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. We also have a month, more than a month, until the start of training camp, and we will have podcasts leading up until there, and at least once a week, I think we can say, until the start of training camp in July. And we're going to break down this roster, break down everything, and much, much more as we get closer to the start of training camp. Jonas, looking forward to a little bit of time off, potentially.
Need to get some new clothes, because all the ones that I ruined today. Pen.
You had a pen explode like you were a sixth grader. It blew all over your new polo and all over your shirt.
This costs like $18, but
But it's the first day that you've worn it.
I know the shorts. I'm a little bit more pissed about. 'Cause
If you know how to get blue ink,
I
out of
already
shorts,
Googled. I think you had to read it more quickly than I did.
at Jonas_Shaffer, send in your laundry tips. Thanks so much for tuning in for Jonas.